Is it a book about divorce from a child's perspective or from the alcoholic's perspective? I have a fan theory about The Shining, and it may not hold any water by the end of this readathon. And I hope you've read the book, because fucking spoiler warning, if you're going to leave spoilers for anything other than The Shining, please leave a warning before your post, before your comment. I don't mind if you spoil one of the other books for me a little bit. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to David's Den. I'm David, and this time I'm not wearing a jacket, so the collar can't sit out for the entire video. I was so pissed when I saw that, but I was not about to go back and refilm all of that shit. So, in case you couldn't tell from my last two videos about early Kingisms and how they relate to The Shining, I am a true fan of Stephen King's book, The Shining. Okay, and coming up next week, we're going to be reviewing the miniseries from 1997, and then the week after that, I'm comparing it to the book. But I've already spent a lot of time analyzing this book, and something really started bothering me. And I touched on this in my last video, if you've seen it, and this is going to be a little different from my normal videos because I'm not picking anything apart. Well, I am picking things apart, but I'm not going to be deeply analyzing a piece of art, right? A piece of literature or a piece of cinema. I'm going to come up with a fan theory. And frankly, I don't normally like fan theories. I think they're trying to impose something on the writer's artistic vision. But one of the things you learn through the theater is that a script is written and then handed off to a director, and that director has a vision. And it's absolutely fantastic when you can, in original production, say, the writer or the composer or the lyricist is working with the director and together they come to a cohesive vision. But beyond that, Shakespeare's not around. Direct it however you have a vision to direct it, right? And I think that there's a certain element of art that says, once I put it out in the world, it is yours to analyze and take from what you as an individual will take from it. So, I have a fan theory about The Shining, and it may not hold any water by the end of this readathon, because so far we've only gotten through 4 books. We're on The Shining, and King has kind of an extended universe we haven't talked about yet. The most obvious example is going to be Dr. Sleep, which is a direct sequel to The Shining, which envisions where is Danny however many years later as an adult, and how did the events of The Shining affect him, which might throw a wrench in my fan theory. I know that Dick Halloran appears in It, but I haven't read that book in probably 20 years plus, so I don't remember how he shows up or what the context is in reference to The Shining. I know that the Overlook is mentioned once in Misery, and I think I have a way around that, but again, I haven't read Misery in probably 15-ish years, 15 to 20 years, so this might not hold any water, and right now I'm kind of talking out of my ass. And I promise I'm going to get to the theory in a second, but here's what happened. I started making a lot of notes and finding quotes, and I already had a lot picked out. And I started trying to organize my thoughts, and it turned into an outline that I would normally change into a scripted video that's, 30 minutes long, and maybe this video will end up 30 minutes long. I'm hoping it doesn't. So what I did instead was stop amassing all of my notes. I went back to a Reddit thread that I started, and I also did it on Facebook in a Stephen King fan page that got taken down because I was new to the group and didn't read the rules, and there were spoilers, and I was supposed to put spoilers in comments, not in the actual post. Thank you to the woman whose name I don't remember now, because I should have thought to screenshot all of your responses, because you helped me develop some of this, actually. She was actually a counselor and dealt with drug addiction. So she was very helpful. So thank you if you happen to be watching, whoever you are, that replied in the first 12 hours before my post was taken down. But the post exists on Reddit and as well, an exact copy. And I decided to pull it up on my computer and just go through it. And I also have some quotes that I want to that I can reference because I think I already made this theory concise and laid my points out here. So I just want to read it to you and touch on things and how I've expanded my thoughts since, because I was only about 3/4 of the way through the book when I came up with this. And I went to Reddit and said, hey, I don't know if the extended universe or the ending of The Shining, because I hadn't read it in so long. I want your thoughts. And I got some great feedback. So here it is. The Shining all happens in Jack's head while he's going through detox. It's a delusion that his mind has created to help him work through the shock of killing a kid on the bike at the beginning of the book and Wendy divorcing him and taking Danny away. I know. There's something to be said for King didn't write it to be all in his head, okay? However, King has not said that it isn't all in his head either, so I'm running with this theory. King talks about going crazy. While Jack's exploring 217 after the incident with Danny and they find the bruised neck, all the old phrases began to parade through his mind. It seemed there must be hundreds of them. Cracking up, not playing with a full deck, lost your marbles, guy just went Looney Tunes, he went up and over the high side, went bananas, lost his football crackers, nuts, half a sea bag, all meaning the same thing, losing your mind. And that's in chapter 30, okay? But in chapter 21, Night Thoughts, Danny is remembering a friend of his from, back in Maine. One of the kids' dads from being laid off went a little crazy, and his daddy had taken him on his lap and explained that Mr. Stenger had been under a great deal of strain, some of it about his family and some about his job and some of it about things that nobody but doctors could understand. He had been having crying fits, and 3 nights ago he had gotten crying and couldn't stop it and had broken a lot of things in the Stenger home. It wasn't losing your marbles, Daddy said. It was having a breakdown. And Mr. Stenger wasn't in a bug house, but a sanitarium. But despite Daddy's careful explanations, Danny was scared. There didn't seem to be any difference at all between losing your marbles and having a breakdown. And whether you called it a bug house or a sanitarium, there were still bars on the windows and they wouldn't let you out if you wanted to go. When will they let him come back? Danny asked his father. Just as soon as he's better, Doc. But when will that be? Danny had persisted. Dan, Jack said, no one knows. And that was the worst of all. It was another way of saying never, never, never. A month later, Robin's mother took him out of nursery school and they moved away from Stovington without Mr. Stenger. Right? The idea of someone going nuts is in the book, and I'm using that term, someone having a mental issue, mental health episode. I'm using that term because it's the quote we just read. It's right there in the book. The bike incident. Al Shockley, a friend of Jack's when he has his teaching position that Al helped him get, and Al helped him get the job at the Overlook as well. It all ties together. Al and him were drinking buddies, and they went out and got drunk. And then on the way home, at I think it was 3 a.m, they hit a bicycle as they came around a curve in the middle of the road. And the kid is nowhere to be found. It was just a bicycle standing upright in the middle of the street. Okay? My theory is that everything that we know of the book until that moment is fact. Everything after that moment is a combination of fact and how Jack twists it in his psyche while he's having a psychotic break into a delusion that helps him cope with losing his family while he's going through detox. Because delusions can be a symptom of detox. And Freud and modern psychiatry, and we've talked about this in Salem's Lot, and how King develops his characters based on the Freudian psychological model. Oh my God, this is so intricate. I'm going to try to be simple. After the incident of the bike, the next morning, Wendy tries to talk to him about divorce in the book. Before she gets a word out, she says, I want to talk to you, is all, and Jack basically says, I know what you're going to say. Hold off for a week and see if you still want to talk about it, because he has decided to give up drinking and thinks that when he gives up alcohol, everything will be fine. It will fix the problems in his family, which obviously it doesn't if you've read the book, and I hope you've read the book because fucking spoiler warning, I should have put that at the beginning. Okay, I'm going to edit this and put it back at the beginning. So, the next few weeks after that morning, Jack scours the papers looking for an obituary for whoever may have been on the bike and killed, or any sort of news story that says, hey, this happened and we're looking for the driver of this car. And he doesn't find any. And then he ends up losing his job because he hits George Hatfield, who is slashing his tires. I mean, again, always, nothing is ever an alcoholic's fault, right? He slashed my tires. He made me angry. I hit him. Therefore, I lost my job. It's not my fault. I was drinking. It wasn't my fault when I broke my son's arm, right? That's the escape route. Always an excuse. It's never your fault. You put it out there so it's not on you. And you truly believe it. So now Jack has to cope with not drinking and cope with his own faults and how he may be to blame for some of the problems in his home. I argue that the police actually did come to the door and they did arrest him. And there was a kid that got killed on that bike. And this is where the psychotic break happens. In order to deal with it, Jack's psyche creates a false memory of there not being a child on the bike. He doesn't remember getting arrested. He doesn't remember being put in prison or then sent to a rehab facility, because I think the incident with George Hatfield was actually one of the other inmates, whether it was a rehab facility or the prison, or most likely a state-run rehab facility. I think that George Hatfield was actually another inmate or patient that he had an altercation with, and then he got put into solitary confinement. So his mind used that as the incident of, I'm no longer a teacher, and I got a job at this Overlook Hotel. And I would say, and I'm projecting toward what might be happening in Misery here, that the reason the Overlook is mentioned is that it was a real hotel and that there may have been a story in the papers that Jack was reading. That's a pure speculation. That doesn't come from the actual book. But I think it's a key that makes it maybe work in the wider universe. So I'm not ruling it out. Because again, we're not explicitly told that didn't happen. That's my only kind of real jump from the text. And also that Dick Halloran was in there, and that's how Dick becomes part of his story. I think that Danny's shine is actually real. He has this ESP. He knows his parents' thoughts. These are things that are established before the incident with the bicycle in the book. Okay, I'm starting to ramble again, so I'm going to try to get focused here. So one of the reasons I like Stephen King is his attention to detail and use of foreshadowing, motif, and metaphor. I 100% understand the concept of the bike incident being a rock bottom or a final straw that changes Jack's life. That is not lost on me. But King doesn't put events in his stories that don't come back. I'm not going to say this because it's a huge spoiler for Salem's Lot. If you watch that video, or if you've read the book, watch the video and you'll understand what I'm talking about. And that comes back 300 pages later at the end of the book, completely forgotten until the heroes figure out. It's fucking brilliant, if I may say so. King's Chekhov's gun game is strong in Salem's Lot, and it is also strong in The Shining. Check out my second part of the book review. I talk about it a lot. So the bike not coming back in The Shining really started to bother me. And then something clicked, and here's my theory. There are threads and there are loose ends to be tied up, which I think I've actually done. So I'm going to skip that part of the Reddit post, and here it is. Everything is happening in Jack's mind while he goes through detox in a prison or psychiatric rehab facility, most likely a psychiatric ward in a prison hospital. Instead of taking forever to type out a well-planned essay on the topic, I told you, I'm going to lay out some bullet points from my rambling brain as I piece things together. Jack and Al actually did kill that boy on the bike. Probably a hit and run, and the shock of it all caused a short-term memory loss for Jack and a break from reality. His own mind, already having blackout issues from drinking, which is established in the book, blacks out the body and recreates the story so that there was no kid. All right, we've talked about that. Now, the next morning, the police arrest him and he's forced into detox in jail instead of choosing to sober up on his own. And of course, his mind rewrites the story due to the psychotic break in detox. Now, this woman who was so helpful, whose name I forget and I'm so sorry, said that that's not how detox works. And I said, aren't there delusions? And she said, yes, there are delusions in detox, but there are also moments of lucidity. And I said, couldn't some of these moments, like with the snowmobile, right, where he goes out to fix the battery in the snowmobile and he firmly believes he is doing good. He's had the conversation with his wife and his son, and it's time to leave the Overlook. This is what a responsible person does. And then the addiction, the Overlook, the ghost, the demons.
What's the difference between a demon and a ghost?
In his psyche that he's been exploring as he's detoxing from alcohol, come back and convince him to throw the battery away and strands them there. I said, couldn't those moments where he cares, and there's more than just the snowmobile, the bruises on Danny's neck had faded and their fears seemed to have faded with them. On Thanksgiving afternoon, Wendy had been pulling Danny around on his sled while Jack worked on the play, which was now almost done. "Are you still afraid, Doc?" she had asked, not knowing how to put the question less baldly. "Yes," he answered simply, "but now I stay in the safe places." Is this rationalization? Is this saying as long as I don't let it affect my family, I'll be okay? But then how do I not let it affect my family? It's a moment, whatever the outcome is, Jack is realizing that he's hurt his family and that they tiptoe around him, that they stay in the safe places, right? I said, couldn't those moments where he cares, and there's more than just the snowmobile, be his moment of lucidity if we look at detox delusions in the frame of entertainment and how they are portrayed to make a point thematically rather than realistically? And she said, yeah, that would be perfectly valid. And then went into this really great story about watching One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, also with Jack Nicholson in one of her classes. She was actually a counselor and dealt with drug addiction. So she was very helpful. And she was talking about this class she took in college about how mental illness is portrayed in the media. So oh my God, thank you so much. Okay, so we've hit that point. Wendy takes Danny and files for divorce, right? She doesn't just say, I want to talk about divorce. She actually does it. But the shock of the betrayal is too much. So Jack creates the storyline of her thinking about it to give him more time. I also want to argue that because we in real life, or maybe this is me with slight paranoia, we tend to say, why did somebody do X? So we create reasons Y and Z in our head and conversations they must have had either with themselves or with somebody else, like Wendy talking to Danny about whether or not they should stay at the Overlook and choosing that they're going to leave even if Jack doesn't. I'm saying that Jack created those conversations in his delusion as a reason for the events that happen in his delusion. While waiting trial in prison to determine how much time he will spend in jail, he gets into and time is a whole thing, the motif of the clock I want to talk about. I'm not going to get into it because it would be finding a ton of quotes, but the idea of striking midnight and Danny going into one of his trances in the hotel coming alive around him, and we hit that kind of crisis climax in the story. Yes, time is a big thing, so it's capitalized. He gets into a fight with another inmate who in his mind is the student who feels cheated for not getting enough time in debate class. Jack is moved to the psychiatric unit, which in his mind is the Overlook Hotel. As the divorce proceedings and custody decisions happen outside of the hospital, Jack is helpless, locked up inside. This is all just too much. The guilt of killing a kid, his wife leaving him, his son ripped away, facing a life sentence or a death penalty. The delusion he is suffering from must become more intricate to explain everything away. And we end up with Haunted Hotel. And I discussed in the other video about The Shining, where I analyzed it, how all of these ghosts in the hotel are probably the demons that Jack is dealing with in his own psyche.
What's the difference between a demon and a ghost?
That cause him to drink in the first place. So this fits right into the literary analysis. Our mind will make up stories to help us cope with things that we don't understand. Dreams or delusions will be made, etc. The character is an author already, as is King, with a fantastic imagination. So it is not so far-fetched that he would come up with a story he wanted to write by finding an old scrapbook as a delusion that then takes a left turn every time something new pops up. And I would say that he finds that scrapbook buried in the basement. And he starts uncovering all of the layers of his psyche, all of the layers of the Overlook's history to find the demons, right? Which is what happens when you start going through therapy in a psychiatric unit, when you're going through detox. Jack fills his mind with the characters of the Overlook who are really people in prison hospital with him. Okay, here it is. I think that the warden is Ullman, possibly, right? The manager of the hotel who gives Jack the outline, the lay of the land, gives him his orders and tells him what to do. The guy who shows him around when he gets to the hospital or the prison is Watson, who shows him around and says, be careful of that boiler, right? All of the patients in the hospital with schizophrenia or homosexual tendencies, which was at the time of the novel's writing, in the process of being undeclared as a mental illness, or they're there because they have murderous impulses or whatever, they become the residents of the Overlook. He literally has a built-in cast of characters for the costume ball at the end of the story.
Midnight, stroke of midnight.
What the f***? right? We have the gay guy who's wearing the dog outfit, you hoping that he's going to go back to bed with Mr. Derwent when, you hear the women gossiping about how he's just along for fun and laughs, and maybe this is how people see him. Although, faggot of the word, and I fucking hate that word, but I'm using it because it's appropriate here. The word choice is appropriate for this and what they're trying to say. The prison handbook he's given might be the scrapbook, right? He turns it into the scrapbook, and his delusion makes it all of these stories about the Overlook's history. Halloran is the judge on the outside. No, I've changed this. I think that Halloran is actually a social worker. Basically, abused wife and abused child, and there are social workers who help them get set up and help sever ties with the abusive ex-spouse and go through the divorce proceedings. And I think this sets up the end. Halloran watched the receding land and wondered if the boy was all right. He had developed an affectionate feeling for that boy, although his folks hadn't seemed all that much. He hoped to God they were watching out for Danny. That's Dick, the social worker, stepping in. He's flying back to the Overlook at this point. And I think this sets up the end where Halloran can be with Wendy and Danny. I think that this all fits. Okay, according to Freud and modern psychology, the mind wants to win, to make a clean break, to reach an understanding. It makes a final ending to the delusion that can't be ignored. As such, the end of the delusion matches the end of the real life situation. I said Halloran must die because I was thinking of the movie. He doesn't die in the book. We've already covered that. Jack is alone at the end in the hotel with all of its inhabitants, just like he is in jail or in a psychiatric unit with the other prisoners or patients. Wendy and Danny have left him and they have started a new life. The psyche trying to distance him, turning Danny and Wendy against Jack so that he has to sever his tie with them consciously. The dad yelling at him through the CB radio, right? At one point, coming from the CB radio, their one and only connection with the outside world, I might add, Jack hears his father's voice going up higher and higher, becoming something maddening, not human at all, something squealing and petulant and maddening, the voice of the ghost god, the pig god, coming dead at him out of his radio, and no, you are dead, you are in your grave, you are not in me at all. Right, the cyclical nature of abuse, of alcoholism. I'm not going to get into all the stories about his dad and beating his mother with his cane. Like, that all plays into this. Children will listen, right?
Children will listen.
Danny distancing at that moment where I had that amazingly crazy editing accident where I tried to do something that looked really cool with blood dripping, and somehow this happened.
Run away. Quick, and remember how much I love you.
And I couldn't tell you what settings I played around with that got me there, but so happy with it. I wish I could reproduce that I will never be able to reproduce is what I'm trying to say. I have no idea how I made that effect, and I also have no idea how my camera shut off while I was filming the last, 3 minutes of this. Is there a cat playing? Bruni, please do not play with that. It's this. My camera shut off, and I'm trying to touch the last few points that I had made. So the first point is that Danny actually distances himself from Jack in the delusion, right? He says to him at that final fight, right before this effect, and we're going to get back to it in a second because I'm being self-indulgent and I readily admit it. So Danny says to him this monster thing in front of him that he says, "You are not my daddy." Danny told it again, and if there's a little bit of my daddy left inside you, he knows they lie here. Everything is a lie and a cheat. And of course, he's referring to the addiction, the alcoholism, the things that the disease makes him do, the abuse he has steeped upon his child and his wife. But ultimately, Danny is the one thing that Jack refuses to actually sacrifice, right? When he's face to face with his child, that little bit of himself that is left inside this monster, that the addiction that the hotel has created, Danny says, "You are not my daddy." Suddenly, the real Jack pulls out. Moment of lucidity, right? As he beats the alcoholism. Well, no one ever beats a disease, but as he comes out on the other side and he is now sober, right? In reality, his delusion severs all ties to face it. He basically tells Danny to run away, to save himself, to never see him again. It's his choice. It becomes Jack's choice, not Danny's. The body trembled slightly, and the bloody hands opened like broken claws. The mallet fell from them and thumped to the rug. That was all. But suddenly his daddy was there, looking at him in mortal agony and a sorrow so great that Danny's heart flamed within his chest. The mouth drew down into a quivering bow. "Doc," Jack Torrance said.
Run away. Quick, and remember how much I love you.
Then, instead of aiming it at Danny, it reversed the handle, aiming the side of the roque mallet at its own face. He literally severs all ties, because in his delusion he kills himself. What he's doing psychologically is killing off the alcoholism. So then, of course, as Dick Halloran leaves and turns around on the snowmobile and sees that black cloud coming up, right, and flying away, which we're meant to believe was the evil of the Overlook being exorcised, what it really is Jack's alcoholism. And the whole book, as we discussed in the previous video, is about Jack's fear of failure. That room 217 represents the darkest demon in Jack's psyche. Fear of failure. Failure at being a good father and a good husband. Failure to stay sober. Failure in his career, in his friendships. Eventually, the weight of these things become a self-fulfilling prophecy in spite of his best intentions, and that can drive a person mad. So suddenly, if the alcoholism is gone, then the fear of failure is gone because he is in a prison in reality and not able to drink. There is no fear of failure because the possibility of failure has been taken away from him. Wendy and Danny have left him and they have started a new life. They're not coming to visit him, right? Not after what he did to them, after he killed someone. Okay, there must be an explosion as the fantasy Jack has concocted crumbles around him and he's left with reality. And that reality is that he did this to himself. Just like the explosion is his fault. You will remember what will be forgotten. Well, that's Danny that remembers it, not Jack. And because Danny's shine is real, he knows what his father is going through. He can hear his thoughts. He's in tune with his dad. He knows all of this, right? Which is so scary and must be so traumatic for a 5 going on 6-year-old, which makes me think that anything that he remembers that plays into Dr. Sleep, if his shine is real, might be justified. And that wonderful woman that was speaking to me about the addiction said that it could be read that way. So I'm holding on to it. So unless I get to it or Misery and Dr. Sleep and this whole thing is blown out of proportion, I don't know if I'm going to say this is what was intended or that King wrote this fan theory into the book, but I maintain that it stands and that it is a valid reading. Okay, I don't know why I'm so excited or vehement about this. It's really not that big of a deal, but I'm sharing it with you guys and I hope you're enjoying it. And I want to hear your thoughts. So please comment down below. If you're going to leave spoilers, I think that's okay for this. But if you're going to leave spoilers for anything other than The Shining, please leave a warning before your post, before your comment. I don't mind if you spoil one of the other books for me a little bit. Please don't tell me how it ends or anything. But for anyone else that might be reading, that might not want to hear, little tidbits or information, please make a note before you leave your comment at the start of your comment that there will be spoilers. That should have been much easier to say, but you understand my point. Okay, now here are a few things I don't think ruin the theory, but I'm not quite sure how they fit in yet. Danny's shine, is it real or did Jack make it up to reflect the way kids can sense problems between their parents, even if it's not talked about, like Dr. Edmonds in the doctor's office? Your son seems to believe you to have seriously contemplated divorce. He spoke of it in an offhand way, but only because he believes you are no longer considering it. We never even discussed it. Not in front of him, not even in front of each other. Yeah, we've talked about this. I buy that it's real. The Wasps Nest, I love this metaphor and motif through the book. It speaks so much. So the wasps are Jack's alcohol issues. It's literally the things he has to deal with. We talked about that also in my dramatization of Dr. Edmund's office, right? Not in front of him, not even in front of each other.
I don't communicate very well.
You are a fucking alcoholic!
I've been a lousy father.
Sting, all of the problems that he is now facing as he uncovers the problems that he has to deal with. I'm rambling again. Let's get somewhere where it's coherent, okay, guys? Okay, so we talked about this, knowing other people's thoughts. So if Wendy is going to behave a certain way, in effect, Jack made her do or think the things that she does or thinks in the delusion. We are, after all, seeing the story from Jack's perspective as he is the one creating it. And I want to take a tangent here to say this all started because I was wondering, is this a book about divorce? Yes. Is it a book about divorce from a child's perspective or from the alcoholic's perspective? I could tell from reading the book, the first half, that Wendy was a supporting character and either Jack or Danny was the protagonist. Of course, after I started coming up with this theory, I realized that Jack is the protagonist. But I was wondering if Danny is the protagonist and we are focusing on divorce from a child's perspective. How does the bike play in? What? That's kind of how this whole theory got started. So I was saying if we're seeing this from Jack's perspective, different people are different facets of Jack. Wendy is fairly rational, tries to see the good in Jack even as things go south. She even, after she stabs him, tries to help him at one point. Do we know Danny's thoughts because Jack is acknowledging the pain he's causing his child, right? Halloran is always portrayed as Danny's confidant or his savior. Is this because on some level Jack knows that the judge or the social worker that Halloran has Danny's best interests at heart and that his mind is trying to reconcile that? And he knows Dick Halloran. Maybe he saw his picture in the paper with the Overlook explosion. So it all becomes part of his delusion. Oh my God, this really might be complete bullshit, but I'm running with it, guys. There's a cat playing with the string on the lapel mic, and I'm very scared as to... Excuse me, no, let me have that. Okay, my recap. Jack is the victim, nothing is ever his fault. The bicycle is the moment of the psychotic break. He sees a story about the Overlook exploding. Possibly Dick Halloran is in there while he's waiting to be arrested in reality. He gets arrested. He goes to a state prison or a rehab facility and goes through detox, which causes delusions. And then he understands in some cognizant way that his wife and child are leaving him and that he will not be drinking anymore. And his mind creates a delusion that locks him in with his psyche and his own demons and his problems by exploding the world and leaving him trapped in it while Danny and Wendy are elsewhere. There is no fear of failure because the possibility of failure has been taken away from him. Now he's alone with all of his ghosts and all of his demons.
What's the difference between a demon and a ghost?
And that's it. That's my theory. It's a little convoluted. We take into account King's Freudian ideas in character development with one little itty-bitty stretch about things being in newspapers that Jack is combing through that may explain the extended universe. I'm not sure. Rake me through the coals down in the comments, please. And I'm already hard at work on writing the script for the mini-series review, which is going to be next week, followed by the adaptation correlation, and I can't wait to see you guys then. And quite frankly, I'm almost ready to be done with The Shining, because I can't get it out of my fucking head. It's such a great book, and every time I think I'm done examining it, something else pops in that I want to tell you guys about. Okay, back to editing. See you guys next week.